आइए हम सुने विज्ञान की अनकही कहानियाँ। आइए हम सुने विज्ञान की अनसुनी कहानियाँ। एक नई दुनिया की आवाज़ आपकी आवाज़, विज्ञान की आवाज़, की आवाज़।
Celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, we bring you a podcast series on STEM popularization, science, technology, engineering, mathematics and medicine, supported and catalyzed by the National Council for Science and Technology Communication, Government of India. This program is produced by Media for Community Foundation. Creative content and technical support is given by Purvasha Banerjee and Shushanto Das.
एक नई दुनिया की आवाज़ आपकी आवाज़, विज्ञान की आवाज़, की आवाज़, की आवाज़।
Vigyan Ki Awaaz podcast series aims to popularize new ideas of science and technology, which highlight STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. This brings to the surface the efforts and researches of Indian scientists, which is desired to bring a change in community learning and teaching, access to knowledge of resources, and social paradigms. Our goal is to spread the name of indigenous Indian research stories and their masters among the masses of society in a very easy manner. Bose Institute was set up in 1917 by Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, the founder of modern science in the Indian subcontinent. It is Asia's first modern research center devoted to interdisciplinary research and bears a century-old tradition. The institute was founded as not merely a laboratory but a temple, with its principal aims being the advancement of science and diffusion of knowledge. Swami Vivekananda, Sister Nivedita, whose influence is reflected in the institute's emblem of Vajra, was significant in the setting up of the institute, and Rabindranath Tagore were among those who had consistently inspired and supported Jagadish Chandra Bose in his endeavors. Ever since the establishment of the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India in May 1971, Bose Institute has been an autonomous grant-in-aid institution of DST. Over the last century, the institute has endlessly strived to preserve the legacy of its illustrious founder. In this podcast, we are happy to present Dr. Srimanti Sarkar, professor in Bose Institute. Dr. Sarkar has an unique observation that giardiasis can be even more harmful than death sometimes. However, before going into more details about her study, let's hear from her own voice about her academic journey.
I am a professor at Bose Institute. My journey in science started with my master's in biochemistry from the University of Kolkata or Calcutta. And then I moved abroad. So I got my PhD from the Pennsylvania State University, College of Medicine, working in the laboratory of Professor Anita Hopper. Professor Hopper is a world-renowned name in yeast genetics. So I was fortunate enough that I got into her lab, and I learned a lot about yeast genetics in her lab, and I also learned the philosophy of doing science. So that was something that left a lifelong impact on my future scientific career. After getting a PhD from Penn State, I moved to the laboratory of Professor Scott Emmer at the University of California, San Diego. He is part of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, so he's again another stalwart in his area, and I was engaged in his lab trying to understand another aspect of yeast cell biology. So from both these experiences, what I've gathered was a very comprehensive knowledge of yeast cell biology and how proteins move from one portion of the cell to another. So when I came back and I started my own lab in India, I did not want to pursue yeast research anymore. I wanted to work on a specific problem that is important in the Indian context. So my independent research track followed the biology of a human pathogen, Giardia lamblia. And at Bose Institute, I'm looking at the cell biology of this pathogen. But I'm also using my expertise in yeast because that gives me an added advantage of trying to understand Giardia's biology using yeast as a tool.
Dr. Srimanti Sarkar in Vigyan Ki Awaaz now speaks about giardiasis and focuses on the alarming reports on drug-resistant Giardia.
So I would like to tell our audience a little bit about Giardia lamblia. Many of you may have heard about this organism. If not the name of the organism, you may be familiar with giardiasis. At some point of your life, being in India, you must have contacted it. So I'm interested, like I said, I'm interested in Giardia lamblia. It's a human gut pathogen. It lives inside our intestine. How does it get there? Well, it does so when we eat contaminated food or drink contaminated water. So it's a gut parasite. So let me explain what a parasite is, because some of you may not be familiar with the term. It is an organism that lives inside or on another organism and then derives its nutrition from the host. So Giardia itself is very, very tiny. You cannot see it with the open eyes. We study Giardia by using very high power microscopes. So once inside our body, Giardia divides in our small intestine, and when patients are infected, they are suffering from giardiasis. They complain of nausea, vomiting, belching. Your tummy is going to feel very distended, and sometimes you will also experience loose stool. So this is what is giardiasis symptoms. For those of you who have not had it, you're lucky. When a patient with giardiasis passes stool, the organism comes out of the body and it can stay alive in the open environment for several months. So if we don't keep our environment clean, then there's a high chance that this organism will mix with our food and our drinking water and then infect another person. So like I mentioned, giardiasis is very common in India. There are drugs to treat this disease. For example, you may have been prescribed metronidazole or tinidazole. But there are also very alarming rising reports of drug-resistant Giardia. And there are also drug resistance in Giardia is a pressing problem in the Indian context as well. There are several reports in literature to indicate that. So we need newer drugs to combat this pathogen. So we have to look for ways to kill the pathogen because it's inside us. So we want to kill the pathogen, but at the same time, we don't want to affect the host. So there lies the challenge. And so to do this, we have to selectively identify cellular processes that Giardia has, but the host organism, let's say us or humans or dogs or for that matter cows, don't have that process. So if we find such a process, then we can make drugs that target this process, shut it down so it kills Giardia, but not the host. Okay? So this is the basic idea between the line of research that is being pursued in my lab. So my laboratory is specifically studying the process by which this parasite feeds within our gut. So it's inside the gut and it's using the food that we are eating, it's taking that in. So the way Giardia feeds is that it has little pouches located very close to the cell surface. These pouches are like shopping bags. So when you go shopping, you open your bag and you take in the fruits and the vegetable. So Giardia selectively opens these pouches by fusing these pouches to the cell membrane. And then the contents of the intestine can flow into the pouches. The pouch shuts back, and then those contents are distributed to the rest of the Giardia cell. So whatever we eat, Giardia can collect in these pouches and then release the content inside its own cell. So to kill the parasite, my laboratory is studying the cellular factors that are needed for the fusion of these pouches to the cell membrane. That, in a nutshell, is what we are trying to do. So what we have understood is this parasite is absolutely amazing. Other than it being a pathogen, it is an organism that a cell biologist will absolutely love, in the sense that it does its own cellular processes very differently. So for students of biology, you may know that all cells have one nucleus. Giardia has two nuclei, right? It has many of the things that we take for granted, like mitochondria, which we call powerhouse of the cell. Giardia doesn't have these mitochondria. In spite of having so much differences, in spite of facing the same challenges that you and I as organisms, living organisms face, Giardia is able to tackle those challenges but use many innovative things. So that's where, other than studying Giardia as a pathogen, I am fascinated by this organism as a way to address life's challenges in a different way. So I call this Giardia engineering life with a different toolkit. It uses different tools. So as a bonus of this, having this different toolkit, its tools are different than ours. So we are homing in on the tools it uses to fuse these pouches to the cell surface. So we specifically look at proteins, and there are some lipids that also play a part in this. So we are looking at those proteins that cause the fusion of the membrane. And we have found that Giardia's proteins are very different. And to prove that these proteins are different from what you and I have, that's where I use yeast. Because in yeast, we can put in human proteins, we can put in Giardia proteins and show that they behave differently. So we have been able to identify the differences in the Giardia proteins, the function that they do, how they do it, and how they are different from the human proteins. And this is the time that we are going to now sort of even go in deeper and look at the very minute details so that we can design drugs against these proteins.
Though Giardia does not kill anybody, but Dr. Srimanti Sarkar explains how the weaker section of our society is affected by Giardia on multiple levels and shares some of the really dangerous information which she has observed for years.
You know, there are those who will tell you that Giardiasis doesn't kill anybody, right? So why it is important to study this organism? It's not heart disease, it's not cancer. So for that, let me tell you that in some cases, the long-term consequences of Giardiasis may prove to be fate worse than death. For example, for those of us who have jobs, regular jobs, where we have medical leave, right? We get diarrhea, we take 2 days leave, stay at home, get cured, come back and join. But when it comes to daily wagers, those when they cannot work on 3-4 days, they have limited financial resource. Not working for 3-4 days is going to deplete that even further. Also, for children coming from economically backward sections, they have very poor diets, and these children are particularly vulnerable to Giardiasis. Okay? And these parasite, once it infects these children, it causes malabsorption syndrome. So these children had less access to nutrition, and now they are more susceptible to Giardia, and Giardia makes them even more malnourished, right? So these children are known to exhibit stunted growth, so they don't reach their proper height, they are more sickly, and not only that, for some reason Giardia also inhibits brain development. So both these conditions, being more sickly and having less cognitive ability, makes these children compromised for earning later in life. So you can understand that they carry the burden of giardiasis all through their lives. So even though they were infected when they were very young, they are going to be affected for the rest of their lives. Also, many of our farmers, they depend on dairy cattle, animal husbandry. Giardia infects dogs, cats, dairy cattle, pigs, goats. So what happens is these animals, they produce less milk, they are not as bulky, so they are thinner. So this decreases the income from animal husbandry as well. So you can see that weaker sections of society are affected by giardia at multiple levels.
Dr. Srimanti Sarkar focuses on the way forward in the context of our country.
One of the ways forward is where India is doing great is keeping a very clean environment. That's one of the best ways to tackle giardia. You may say that, is that enough? No, because even first world countries which are very nice and neat and clean, even giardiasis happens over there. So the way forward is to again look for microbes will always try to beat us by acquiring resistance to drugs. So we have to keep one step ahead. We have to look for new drug targets, make new drugs, and we have to have industry come forward and understand that, if you make a drug that you cannot market to the affluent sections of society, even then it is research that is worth pursuing.
Dr. Sarkar does not do this intricate study alone. She speaks about her collaborators both in country and abroad, and she also mentions regarding the role and responsibility of Indian industry.
In India, people who study giardia, they're spread out all over the world. So here in Kolkata itself, there is another institute, National Institute of Cholera and Enteric Diseases. They have a parasitology unit. I collaborate with them. Besides that, we collaborate or share resources with researchers who are spread out across the globe. So there are people working in Argentina, in Canada, in the US, Switzerland, Iran, Bangladesh. We share resources with them. Most of the work that I do in my lab, because I use a very unique approach of sort of understanding proteins by looking at them within yeast cells and also in giardia. This is an approach that is unique to my lab. And so I've been able to take things forward much more than other labs by myself. So yes, we are sort of sharing our resources to fight the common enemy, that is giardia. There is no better lab or worse lab, or there's no competition. The actual fight is with giardia. Indian industry is somewhat involved in giardia. The main involvement so far has been to detect the disease, because you cannot treat it unless you're sure that there are other diarrhea causing agents. So far Indian industry has focused on making diagnostic kits, whether it's PCR based molecular diagnostics or rapid antigen kits. But what industry needs to do is also step up and look for ways to make new drugs to treat giardia. With respect to the kind of research I do, yes, we are identifying drug targets, but what we are also doing is we are setting up screening procedures which can be easily adapted by industry to quickly screen for therapeutic targets and other drugs. So it's a very inexpensive yeast-based system that we do, and industry can take it up and apply it for any kind of therapeutics research, quest research that they might want to do.
We are really thankful to Dr. Srimanti Sarkar, professor in Bose Institute, for providing us with her valuable time and sharing in details about her area of research.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. It was a learning experience and I enjoyed it heartily. Thank you so much.
विज्ञान की आवाज़